Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. On a course, when do most of the dropouts occur? You would think that it would be somewhere in the middle of the course, as clients get more tired, but amazingly, it's the first week of the course. And you stop and think, why would it be the first week of the course? That's when everybody's the most excited, that's when everyone has signed up to do something. It makes no sense that people will drop out in the first week of the course. And yes, that's exactly what happens. It takes a lot of energy to set up something, to start up something, but then you have to do something, and that's when the reality sets in, and that's when you get dropouts. In a small business, you're going to have to hire someone. It may not be an employee, but it might be someone that you're outsourcing work to. And you have to know right at the very start that things are going to work out for you. You have to put in a lot of intensity and time and energy into that training. How do you know that they're not going to drop out shortly after all of this? This is our experience at Psychotactics. We've hired people before, and these are the 3 things that we look for. The 3 things we're going to cover today are hurdles, one benchmark at a time, and consistency. Let's start out with the first one, which is the concept of hurdles. Many years ago, we had a protege course. This course lasted a whole year. And people paid a lot of money. They paid about $10,000 to be part of this course. The interesting part about it was the number of hurdles that you had to go through to get to that course. So you had to read the brain audit, you had to then fill in a form, you had to be part of an interview. There was this huge screening process just to get people on the course. Logically, it makes no sense. You should make things easier for people when you're hiring them or when they're signing up to courses or when they're working with you. But no, that's not the way we go about it. The way we go about it is to create a bunch of hurdles. And just as you're listening to this, you realize, yes, that makes perfect sense. You create hurdles because the people who take on those hurdles, who jump over those hurdles, who maybe trip and fall, but get up and run again, those are the people most likely to continue. Those are the people in whom you're going to put in some training, you're going to put in some effort, and they're going to bounce back and then come back and then do their best. And that's really what you want with someone that you're working with. You don't want someone to say, oh, I can't do this, oh, I can't do that. Instead, you want them to run into the hurdle, to step over that hurdle, and then keep coming back. So the first thing you've got to understand is that when you're hiring someone, you shouldn't necessarily make it easy for them. And this is what we do. We make big and small hurdles. So some of the hurdles are very small. It could be something like send in your application. The second hurdle might take 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I'll give you an example. As you know, we need music for this podcast that you're listening to. In the past, when I tried to hire someone, I put in all the specs that we needed. And of course, you get a whole bunch of responses, and then you'd have to go through the responses. And this would take me a lot of time because the music for this podcast requires so many steps before we even get started. And we've tried over the years to refine that system, and eventually it came down to one thing, which was hurdles. And even as someone is applying for that specific task, we ask them questions that might be slightly difficult. It is, are you willing to spend more time in learning the software? Are you willing to... It doesn't matter what the questions are. The questions are just hurdles. in some ways, you're deliberately slowing them down, deliberately making them think, do I really want this? Because at the early stage, they're just answering a bunch of questions. They're not really or physically doing anything, but there is a thought process. It's a small hurdle, but they have to cross that hurdle. Then you throw the big hurdle at them. Now, in the podcast, we have to first download the software. Then you have to put in all the passwords, and that's a bit of a rigmarole in itself. Then after that, you have to download all of the albums. And each of the albums have to then be activated. And we're talking about 50 albums. And all of this takes a huge amount of time. So that's a much bigger hurdle. And what we tend to do is we make sure that we put in the small hurdle, a big hurdle, a small hurdle, sometimes a big hurdle. You don't have to keep doing this forever. But once you have 2 or 3 hurdles, and that person gets over those hurdles with a bit of difficulty maybe, but they get over those hurdles, then you know for sure that you've made the right start. And the onus is upon you, the person that's doing the hiring. You have to sit down and work out what are the hurdles going to be. What are the big hurdles? What are the small hurdles? And when you put them in place, what you get is this pre-selection. Now, if you noticed, at Psychotactics, we do this when we're hiring someone, but it applies across the board. It applies to members at 5,000 BC. They have to jump over hurdles. If you come to a course, you have to jump over hurdles. If you were doing like the Protégé course, you would have to jump over several hurdles because it was more expensive, it was longer, it required more commitment. Hiring someone is a long-term commitment. And just like any other relationship, there have to be a bunch of hurdles along the way. If it's just too easy, then you get everyone. And then it's very difficult to filter through everyone, which is why the first step that you have to take is create hurdles. Create some small and big hurdles, and that alone gets rid of most of the people. And that brings us to the end of the first part. But what about the second one, where we talk about benchmarks? Did I say benchmarks? No, not benchmarks, but one benchmark at a time. If you walk down the street and you look at a sign in a cafe, you'll often find that they're hiring someone, and they'll say, we want someone that's courteous, that's smart, that's experienced, and they have a whole list of things. And immediately you think, yeah, that could be me if you're looking for a job. But that's the mistake that they're making. What they've got in place are supposed benchmarks, but they're not benchmarks at all. What you want is one benchmark at a time. So what is one benchmark at a time? When I lived in India, I used to draw cartoons for newspapers, for magazines, for architects, for a whole bunch of people. And it got to a point where I realized I wanted to have more free time. The business wasn't just about work, but it was also about free time. And so you have to hire someone. In my own crazy way, I hired 2 people at the same time. One of them was Bala, and the second was Ramesh. Most of the work required at that point in time was to color the cartoons that I was creating. So I'd sketch it out, then I'd ink it, then someone had to scan it, clean it up, do all the stuff in Photoshop, and then color it so that it looked like it was coming from our company. It looked like I had done it. Now, Bala moved at high speed. He would get the job done super fast, but it was never to my satisfaction. I always had to come in and had to look at Bala's work and then make some changes before I could send it off to the client. Ramesh, on the other hand, was completely the opposite. If you gave Ramesh a job, he would do the job perfectly. There was only one problem. He would spend hours, even days, working on it until it was up to his level of satisfaction. And of course, it met my level of satisfaction as well. So we have two parameters here. One is super fast, but you have to fix things. And one is super slow, but it's always perfect, so you never have to check. What is your benchmark? Is it super fast or is it super slow? Because I hired two people at the same time, I had two separate benchmarks, and both of them worked really well, because when I had something that needed to be done very quickly, I gave it to Bala. He would finish it, I would come back, tidy it up, it was gone. When I had the luxury of time, which was quite often, I would give it to Ramesh, and then he would get it done. So what we are talking about here is that you can have benchmarks, you can have many benchmarks, but you can only have one benchmark at a time. Which, if we go back to that sign at the cafe, which is hiring someone and they say courteous and experienced and whatever, well, we can't have them all. We have to have courteous, and then you benchmark for courtesy and courtesy alone. How did they respond in terms of when you wrote to them? Were they courteous? How did they interact with the rest of the staff? Were they courteous? And when you have that one benchmark at a time, you get to evaluate one thing at a time. To go back to hiring people for the podcast music once again, we had to have benchmarks, and the benchmark there was how keen. So what I did, and people didn't know this, but what I did was I put in my phone number, I put in my email address, and I put in my WhatsApp account. And they could get in touch with me through either means. And I mentioned it very casually that they could get in touch. And about 9 people instantly wrote back. They filled in a form, they put in all their details. All of the applicants were very thorough with all of the information that they sent me. But only 2 got in touch. One of them got on email and sent me a whole bunch of stuff, and I was very keen. And then the second person called me and spoke to me. And so I was testing for one benchmark, which is how keen are you? Did we know at that point in time whether they were able to use the software? Did we know whether they would be compatible with us? Did we know anything? No. And you can't know everything. You can't know anything for that matter. Whenever you get into some agreement with someone else, you don't know what to expect. You might have a whole list of things, but the point is, does it meet that one benchmark, that first benchmark? What is that benchmark? And that's the question that you have to ask yourself. Because when you set out those hurdles, then you are setting out those hurdles, you're creating those hurdles so that whoever jumps over those hurdles meets that specific benchmark, whether it's courtesy or it's being keen or someone that's going to work at super speed or someone that's going to work really slow but get the job done perfectly well. That is your benchmark. And when you have that benchmark in place, then you can evaluate against that benchmark. This isn't to say that you don't have to have other benchmarks as you go along. But the starting point is where you get the most dropouts. That's been our experience. And that's really where you need to put in the hurdles and to have that specific benchmark. So we've covered 2 points, hurdles and benchmarks, which takes us to the third part, which is consistency. If you were starting up a podcast today, what would your competition look like? Well, probably millions or tens of millions of podcasts already exist. So there would be a good chance that you would fail, right? What if you were starting a YouTube channel today? Would there be a good chance that you would fail? You'd think so, wouldn't you? But that wouldn't be the case. If you look at the statistics of podcasts, there are millions upon millions of podcasts that don't go past the 10th episode. Just 10 episodes. After 10 episodes, they give up. And what this tells us is that you don't have the competition of tens of millions of podcasts. You probably have a few thousand podcasts, maybe tens of thousands, but that field has narrowed considerably. And the reason why some podcasts or some YouTube channels or some blogs or whatever, the reason why they succeed is because of consistency. Everyone is crappy when they start out. No one is brilliant. No one is great. But the ones that seem to do better than everybody else are the ones that are the most consistent. And this principle also applies to when you're hiring someone. For us at Psychotactics, the most crucial bit is the deadline. And we've got to have a podcast out, and we've got to have enough of a buffer so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. Hence, consistency becomes a very crucial aspect. And this consistency then goes to the person that we're hiring, the person that we're outsourcing to. So if they say that they're going to finish 1/3 of the podcast by Wednesday, 1/3 by Thursday, and 1/3 by Friday, so that we have the complete podcast, then I want to see that. I want to see 1/3 of it completed on Wednesday, 1/3 on Thursday, and 1/3 on Friday. Or if they say that they're going to deliver the entire podcast on Friday, then I want to see that. And it doesn't matter that it's not perfect. It doesn't matter that there are mistakes. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. What matters is the consistency, that they keep their word. And you will have different benchmarks for consistency. When I was in my cartooning days, having Bala do the job meant that he had to be speedy every single time. I couldn't have him do perfect work because that would be a problem. If I needed it in 2 hours, I needed Bala to work at high speed so that most of it was done and then I could just tidy up. If it were Ramesh, that would be a different consistency factor. So if you're just looking at deadlines, then yes, most of us are working to deadlines. But what is your consistency factor? What is that thing that you're looking for? It could be speed. It could be a certain level of perfection. It could be a certain level of courtesy. What is that consistent factor? And yes, I know this sounds a lot like the earlier version, which is benchmarks. But now, how is that benchmark being repeated over and over and over and over again? Because as we go through the days and weeks and months, people will waver a bit. Life always gets in the way. There are always barricades in the way. But over the long term, how consistent is this person? And supposing they're not able to deliver on Wednesday, for instance, do they let you know on Monday itself? So what you're looking for is consistency, because when you have that consistency, then you put yourself in that very small percentage of people that are dependable. And when you're hiring someone, you know that you want someone who's dependable, who will keep to their word and consistently deliver, or at least let you know in advance with enough notice that they can't deliver. And then you can take some steps and you're kind of prepared. And these are the 3 things that we look at almost all the time when we're hiring someone. And every time we run into any kind of trouble, it's because we have let down our guard on these 3 elements. And these 3 elements have people confused because traditional hiring is always about back-checking. It's always about going and figuring out, how did this person do in the past? And yes, that's also a good way to go about it. You can go back to whoever their previous employer was, and you can ask them what their strengths were and what their weaknesses were. But I don't think it's true. You look at it in a relationship, and you look at how 2 people just continuously are at loggerheads with each other, and then that one of them go their own way, or both of them go their own ways, and then they meet someone else, and they're perfectly good with the other person. So what their past was often has some relevance, but not enough relevance for your own business. You have to have your own benchmarks. You have to have your own hurdles. You have to have your own consistency factors. And when the person who you're about to hire meets up with what you're considering, in our case, these 3 points, that's when you know you're on the right track. Yes, you can do your back checking, but I don't think it's as crucial. We all know how we've sent in our resumes. We all know that we pick the right people for the employers to speak to. So it's kind of sugarcoating everything, and you don't get an accurate picture. Where you get an accurate picture is when you ask people to do something, and when you throw hurdles in their way, and when you have one benchmark at a time, and when you have that consistency. And in a way, that's been the summary, that you have to have big and small hurdles. You have to have one benchmark at a time. Are they courteous? And then you benchmark against that courtesy the whole time. And finally, what is that one factor of consistency that you need all the time? That one consistency factor that can never, ever fail. It has to be there on a regular basis, all the time, every time. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Well, what's the one thing that you can do? And the one thing that you definitely should do and can do is create the hurdles. Sit down and work out some small hurdles and some big hurdles, but have hurdles, because when people jump over those hurdles, that's when you know that they are keen. That's when you know that they're willing to do things that the others are not willing to do. And yes, that's the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. On the 10th of October, we are releasing the home study version of the article writing course. Now, most of us know that we can write, because when we grew up, we could all draw, we could all write, and that's what we did. And then somewhere along the lines, our whole perception changed. And the reason why we struggle with so many skills is because we don't have the right instruction. And that's the kind of instruction that you get in the article writing home study version. So there's no live version. We already had one this year. And the next one isn't until 2022. So all you have is the home study version, which is very good, by the way. I'm not trying to put down the home study version. It's available on the 10th of October. And you have to go to psychotactics.com/AW. That stands for article writing. So AW goodies. So go to psychotactics.com/AW goodies, and you will get the goodies, and you will see how they're helpful to you. But it also puts you on the waiting list, because when we launch this product, which is on the 10th of October, then only those people on this waiting list will get a notification. And there are only 35 copies. We know they're digital, but we still have a limit of just 35 copies because we are creating scarcity. Pre-sale is also coming up as a home study, and that's on the 21st of November. So that's a bit away. Right now, it's just the article writing course. Or why don't you join us in 5000 BC? So 5000 BC is a membership, and you probably have been part of other membership sites before. But 5000 BC is different in the sense that I am there every single day, many times a day, answering all your questions. Which is to say that if you went to Google and you just typed in, how do I do this? Or you went to YouTube, you'd probably get an answer. But then when you get stuck, you don't know how to move forward. And 5000 BC is kind of Google with answers to your specific question. So I would say that's a much better way to go, where you have answers to your specific questions. There are articles that we can point you to. So it's a kind of handmade, hand-holding kind of service. It's not consulting, but it's the closest that comes to consulting. So check out 5000bc.com. Again, we will put that barrier in place for you because we want to make sure that you're keen to join. So you have to go there, sign up, and then wait for 21 days. And only at that point in time are you allowed into 5000 BC. So that's it from Psychotactics Land. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? Over the years, we've had a lot of people that we've hired. Some of them were in India, some of them in New Zealand. But the funniest one was definitely in New Zealand. So we had this employee who was recommended by someone quite strongly. And of course, we went through that kind of system where we went through a recommendation and it didn't work for us. She was really funny in the sense that she would drive us completely nuts. But then, of course, we thought that we were smarter than her, so we'd say, okay, here are the list of things that you have to do. And it wasn't just a list, it was a bunch of steps. So say, for instance, you're sending out a newsletter, and you do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, whatever. And she would come back and go, I did it. And you go, what did you do? And she said, I did 7 of the steps. And you go, you did step 1 to step 7? And she would go, no, I just did 7 of the steps. And you didn't know which steps she did. And so you'd have to go over each one of them one by one to find out which ones she had missed out and which ones she had got. And that was just one of the story. I probably need a whole podcast to tell you all the funny, they're funny now, but they were horrible when we had hired her and when she was part of a contract, and it was just a really bad time for us. But yeah, that was the kind of person that we hired. And I don't think it was her fault. I think it was our fault. We didn't do the groundwork. And that's kind of what you need to do as an employer. You need to have your own sense of due diligence and put that in place. And that's when you have a good match. There is someone for everyone. Your job is to do your due diligence. I'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. And you can find out if that's a good match for you. Bye-bye.